to welcome you to today's webinar, which is 7 contact center challenges and how to solve them. It's an exciting webinar. We've got some great speakers lined up for you. So we've got a great audience agenda for you today. So we've got some very good speakers. We're going to be talking through 7 contact center challenges and how to solve them. We've got a triple act going. We've got Luke Talbot from Azzurri. We've got Steve Allington from Katalyst Consulting, and we've also got Stephen Wright from Azzurri. So quite a good number of challenges we've got there. I think there's going to be some fascinating things we're going to share with you. Later on, we'll be doing top tips from the audience. There is a bottle of champagne for the best tip, and I know people like to win that, like to share that, so it would be good. I will also be covering interactive questions and answers, live questions from the audience. We'll also be asking you some questions as we go through. So, just before we get going, just want to share with you a poll. One of the things we're going to be looking at is multi-channel. So the poll is on multi-channel. Do you blend everything, all email, social media, voice, web chat and the like? Do you blend some things but keep others separate? Do you keep everything completely separate? Or blend silo, it's all voice, isn't it? So if you'd just like to vote on which one of those most applies to you. So just if you'd like to vote on that now. So Luke, while everyone's voting, which one do you think is going to be the most common one there?
Oh no, that's an interesting one. I think blend some things but silo others is probably quite a popular approach. I'm kind of hoping that most people don't select blend silo. It's all voice, isn't it? So it's going to be somewhere between the top 2, I think.
Okay, well let's have a look at what the voting is. 68% of the audience has voted. Most common one, yes, blend some things but silo others. 25%, that's quite low, I think, to silo everything. I guess there may be an element of combining, say, web chat and social media there. It'd be interesting if you're blending some things and silo others. Perhaps if you just like to, in the audience, if you just like to put in your box what you're doing there, that would be great. And 15% are already blending everything. So that's certainly higher than I probably expected there. So just hide the poll here, and now delighted to introduce to you Luke Talbot from Azzurri. Luke, if you'd like to get your presentation up on the screen, and please take it away.
Thanks, Jonty. Okay, yeah, my name is Luke Talbot. I'm product manager for Azzurri Innovations, and I'm going to go through 2 sections today. The first is seamlessly integrating social media and other channels. So what I'd like to do is take us all back about 10 years and look at what contact centers might have looked like at the turn of the century. We probably had, most things would have been voice. You know, the vast majority of contacts have been going through a voice ACD into a contact center, and we'd have been allocating calls to just a dedicated group of users there. And we would have seen email, which was very much an emerging channel at that time, and net generally siloed to another area of the contact center, going through a completely different system, probably going through Outlook or just to exchange to mailboxes, possibly using a dedicated system for dealing with email. And this is very much, for many, remained unchanged over the last decade. So what we've got is 2 completely separate solutions. And over the last 10 years, we've seen the emergence of other channels as well. So, for instance, we've got some message tasks like SMS, web chat, and some callbacks being put in from websites, that sort of thing. And sometimes we see those, again, going to another dedicated group of people. This is what we're talking about with our siloed approach, which was in the first poll, which we saw that 2% of the attendees did say that most things are voice. A lot of people, I think it was 25%, and they silo everything. So this is pretty much the approach that they would take. And what we're seeing now very much is the emergence of other media channels to do with social media, for instance, so Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, and to a lesser extent things like YouTube, etc. And again, going to dedicated people in the contact center. Now this non-blended approach, this siloed approach, can be great for very large contact centers who have huge resources at their disposal and very much centered around voice and servicing those traditional channels still.
We've had a bit of feedback from the audience. Valerie says that they silo everything in their organization, and Luke says they are blending email and outbound calls.
Okay, email and outbound. Okay.
An interesting combination, not one I've come across before, but that sort of makes sense in a way.
It does. I mean, we've seen, maybe not blending from the agent's point of view, but certainly blending marketing channels so that, if you are doing any kind of outbound activity, blending that with proactively with SMS outreach and email as well is becoming increasingly common. So that if that's what they're talking about, then that is becoming very much the a standard approach. Certainly siloing everything can be a great approach, but there are pros and cons. So what happens when we want to route a phone call to an agent who's handling an email? That might seem counterintuitive, but if you've got a given number of voice agents and you need to overflow because it's getting busy in the contact center, then that could be something you need to do. And this whole diagram could just start to get pretty messy if we start trying to cross-skill people and get people to handle different activities in the contact center. So there are some pros and cons for this siloed approach. You do get a choice of system for each channel, which is great. You get to go out to market and say, okay, we're going to look at everything there is that does social media, and we're going to get the right one in and give it to 6 or 7 agents in the contact center. And it may work really well for large contact centers, again, where there's a lot of resource. But the cons, you've definitely got, well, the agent front end. So you might be looking at having a mashup or something like that that gives you a single front end. But you've got different logins, different systems. The activity reporting is very disparate as well, both historic and real-time. SLA management can be a bit of a nightmare, and resource management is obviously quite hard too, so you have to do that in a very siloed approach. Now, as things start to progress and as emerging channels start to become more relevant, the messaged channels are very commonly blended. So if you are going to get different systems for each, not having a blended system can lead to a little bit of a nightmare, and certainly it can seem that everything's just falling apart and is very difficult to actually manage using this approach. So this might be a bit of a over-the-top approach to visualizing that, but certainly for some people it can be a bit of a nightmare. So there is an alternative, which is the fully blended approach. We saw 15% of the people in the poll actually said this is what they do, and I think it's 56% saying that they took they blended some things and siloed others. And the way you would do that is by having a single routing system somewhere that handles all of these channels, so email, voice, the message channels, and then your social media. And it can route out to pretty much everybody in the contact center. So everyone becomes an agent to this single platform. The benefit is if you do need to cross-skill, if you need to overflow, you can just move stuff around and get stuff going to different people, and there's no separate login, etc. So this is another approach. And again, some pros and cons. You do get your unified reporting, you get your unified front end. So in terms of management, it's very straightforward. SLA management is more straightforward, as well as so is resource management. The system is designed to deal with multiple channels from the start. In terms of the cons, you've got reduced choice of systems for each channel. So you're pretty much going to get what comes with the contact center platform. So the three approaches to blended implementation really are: you've got your traditional voice ACD. You're going to put your multi-channel is on the side in a different system, and you're going to spoof them as non-voice calls through the ACD. So this is a good starting point if you've got no blending at all. The other approach is to have a multi-channel blended solution which then interacts with the voice ACD. And this can allow you to still concentrate on your bread and butter, voice is the main thing, but then have the multi-channel on the side. Works very well for some very, very large contact centers, and you can achieve consolidated reporting. And then you've got your purpose-built blended routing engine, which was the latter slide that we looked at, where everything's going into one solution. It's built from the ground up to deal with multi-channel, and you get a lot of little extras. So if I'm dealing with an email, can I interrupt that email and give it to and give them a voice call if there's a high priority one? So there are a few challenges to this. I'll just zip through these very briefly. So we've got agent skills and capabilities. Is it appropriate to give an agent who normally handles voice calls emails to deal with? And vice versa. Is it appropriate to give this person who's great at typing calls to deal with? The system, so you may have a huge investment there in a non-voice ACD that simply can't be blended. So is a siloed approach actually the best way to do things from a pragmatic point of view? The scheduling and forecasting is something to bear in mind. It's not as easy, it's not a simple case of just adding in all these multi-channel connectors and then suddenly you can do your workforce management across all those streams. And that leads to some reporting headaches as well. So depending on the solution you choose and the solution you have, you may find you can't simply add up all the activity and expect something sensible to come out at the end. Compliance as well, if you have particularly stringent compliance for handling inbound calls, for instance. Let's say you work for a utility company and you have to answer your calls within 3 rings or 9 seconds or whatever it happens to be. If you've suddenly given emails to all your users, have you just broken compliance and ended up with a massive fine? So you just need to think a little bit about how the different channels interact with each other and what resources you've got left. And the monitoring. Do I have 16 different screens up showing all these channels coming in? Do I have to have a different application to view my reports of social media? So that's just a very brief overview of some of the different approaches to handling multi-channel blending. We're now going to talk about some managing variable call volumes. Now, this is a particularly hot topic for a lot of people around this time of year. It's time to think about the peaks of call volume you might get before the summer holidays if you're working in holiday insurance, for instance, I can imagine. And also we've just gone through some unseasonably bad weather. So again, a lot of contact centres have had high volumes of calls and not particularly high volumes of agents in the contact centre. So really just looking at 4 approaches that we can take. So we're going to look at peak queue management, some workforce management, some skill blending, and self-service automation. So starting with peak queue management, let's imagine this is calls coming into our imaginary contact centre, and I've got a certain number of agents, and they simply can't handle these calls at the top of this peak in the morning. So the first thing we can do is actually move that peak. And we would do that by automatically giving customers the option to schedule a callback or remain in the queue and they will be called back automatically, so a sort of callback, queue back option, something like that. Now this can be very, very good for a contact center. It's pretty easy to achieve in most systems. It can reduce the queue length immediately. It can also reduce that immediate queue time as well. And it puts you in control. So if you know when your peaks and your troughs are and they're quite predictable, you can actually move those peaks to predicted troughs in the contact center and start to flatten the peaks as well. The cons, there's an effect on workforce management. My workforce management is going to look at my peaks and troughs and say you need this many agents here and this many agents there. If I'm suddenly taking my peak and putting it somewhere else, I've suddenly flattened everything, and workforce management thinks everything's fine. It can also turn into a vicious circle. So by moving that peak somewhere else, if I then get another peak at that time unexpectedly, then I'm not going to be able to fill my callbacks, and I'm going to get more callbacks. And that can really have a big impact on customer perception as well. The recycling of the callbacks, if they're not successful, can be an issue. And callbacks themselves can increase AHT, so average handling time for agents. So there's a little bit of a preview time before you actually call the customer to know why you're calling them, what the context is, and what you're able to say.
Well, often with callbacks, it works better if you've got quite peaky volumes. I think it's one of those things where if you're always flat out, it isn't particularly going to help the situation. But those where sometimes it's like you're quiet and then all of a sudden you're overloaded and then you're quiet again. That's sort of where it seems to work.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the contact center, it can be a bit like putting off your bills. If you've got to deal with the calls, you've got to deal with them. If there's no trough later on, you've got nowhere to put them. So yes, that's definitely the fact there. So the next way is managing resources. So we've got this peak of calls. One way to handle them is simply to put more people on the phones. It seems like a really straightforward, obvious thing to say, but it obviously helps you handle those calls. What you then need to look at is reducing the peak later on of staffing. Now, this again is a great approach because it maximizes customer service. So this is the approach to take if what matters to you is getting the calls answered quickly by skilled agents who know what they're talking about, and it can reduce your queue time, so your SLAs are even across the whole day, hopefully. But real-time adherence is critical. There's no point having your workforce management if you're not actually monitoring that in real time to make sure they're doing what you said they were going to do. The peaks can be unpredictable, which completely ruins this approach. And complex shift patterns can be very expensive, so the staffing costs can be high, and you may simply not have enough space to fit that many people in your business. So you may be looking at outsourcing or something like that to achieve this. So softening the peak with skill blending is the next approach. So if I have a peak and a trough somewhere in my contact center, let's say in customer services, maybe my sales team have a completely opposite peak and trough pattern. And the obvious thing to do there is try and fill one with the other. Now, again, this might not always be possible, but if it is, it can maximize agent utilization. I'm taking a relatively non-busy time in one area and filling it up with a busy time somewhere else. So you can fulfill 2 purposes here, maximizing the customer answer time, but also increasing my utilization. You tend to get a reduced queue time, and there is research to show that variety can lead to happier agents or more fulfilled agents. Going against this, cross-skilling may simply not be possible. You know, putting sales calls into the customer services line may not be something you want to do. The peaks may also overlap, in which case you're just going to miss your LSLA on both services. and transfers. So for instance, if you're routing something to somebody who's not specializing in that area, they have to transfer it anyway. Then all you've done is rob Peter to give to Paul, and you've got the same problem. And the customer experience can be really affected by this, so it needs to be done properly. The final approach is self-service and automation. Now, let's say we've still got this contact center with this number of calls coming in. We can't service those lost calls. Well, what if we reduce the number of calls generally in our contact center by automating a large portion of them? So this is great because it has pretty high cost savings, potentially very high cost savings. And what it does, it will take those simple interactions that are very easy to deal with and leave agents with the high value interactions. Again, maximizing the agent happiness, because they're dealing with high value interactions, they're not dealing with the mundane, but also increasing the customer service level there. And in terms of cons, we've got the customer experience. What if the customer doesn't like an IVR? What if they don't like automation? Will that simply lead to them calling in again when they were unfulfilled through automation? And that's going to increase the load on your system generally. And the reporting could be something that people just don't concentrate on. So it's all right that I took 20% of my calls out of the contact center, but have I then just put them somewhere where I never need to think about them again, and we don't revisit it? Yeah. So it needs to be something that we keep on top of.
And it would be very interesting from the audience to find out how you deal with peaky calls coming in. So thank you very much for that, Luke. Okay. We've had some comments back from the audience. The first one is from Jane, who is on the chat room. Jane has said that they blend email and live chat, which is a good way of similar typing skill, I guess. Rudy has said one of the other challenges that faces dealing with agent culture when it comes to blending. So quite interesting on that. So thank you, Luke, for that. I'm now delighted to be able to hand across to Steve Allington. Steve works with Katalyst Consulting. And Steve's going to take us through a couple of other examples of some contact center challenges and how to solve them. So, Steve, if you'd just like to put the slides up on your screen. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonty. Well, there's a couple of topics that I want to talk to you about today. The first is looking at how we improve agent empathy within our contact centers, and then the second is looking at how we can implement and manage effective home working strategies for our agents. So the first thing we want to talk about is the improving the agent empathy. And I think the first point really I want to make on this is that I see very much empathy as being a behavior rather than a skill. I think technology can give us many tools within the contact center for our agents. So, it can equip them with the customer information at their fingertips. It can help them to answer the calls effectively. But in terms of actually giving the empathy skill to an agent, I don't think that technology is able to do that. It's very much a people behavioral trait, which for me means that recruitment is very much the key. I think that when we're talking about what type of customers might be coming into the call center, we want to be thinking about do we recruit an agent profile to match that? Is it suitable, for example, to have people of 19, 20 years of age selling funeral plans to the over 50 market, or similarly, if you're selling pop concert tickets to a One Direction concert, do you really want 50 to 60-year-old people on the phones taking those type of calls? It's difficult to kind of create that rapport and the customer and agent empathy. I think soft skill training and coaching can reinforce the skill. There's a lot we can do with the agents around, soft skill training and coaching. But I think for me, the real key is that replication of your customers in your call center. And we can do that in a number of ways. So a number of clients that I've worked with in the past have had customer open days where they invite customers into the call center, and that way agents and customers are able to put faces to names. They build up a little bit of rapport with each other, and it makes it far easier for them to then take those calls later on in a kind of telephone environment. The other thing is I've recently been involved in a call center project setting up a brand new call center for a client, and one of the things that they wanted to do was create a customer center of excellence. So as a result of that, what we did, the first thing we did was actually go out and understand what the customers wanted and what the customers expected from the contact center through a series of customer workshops. And actually we built the operating target model based on what the customer feedback was and what they told us their expectations were and their desires. And also an interesting one, and I'd be quite interested to hear some of the audience feedback on this, but we have actually in the past been involved in talking to people about getting their customers involved in the recruitment of their agents. So if you've got, for example, a membership subscription base of customers that are buying from you on a regular basis, so it's not like just a one-off ad hoc transaction. Is there some value in actually getting your customers to be involved in recruitment of those agents, if those are the ultimate agents that they're going to be servicing them?
That's quite an interesting concept. That probably works much more easily on business to business. I'm not sure business to consumer it's so easy.
Absolutely, I think business to business is more ideal for that, definitely. But certainly an interesting angle.
And Sarah has said recruitment is key. But how do you judge empathy skills by age? Age cannot be a factor in recruitment. So,
I think that's a fair comment. I didn't mean to come across by saying that with age you gain empathy and the younger don't. I think that there's no substitute for life experience and life skills, and I think that comes across in the contact centre when you're trying to build rapport and relationships with your customers.
Yeah. And it may be you find that if you're looking for empathy, you may find that in a group that better matches is similar to your customer base. And that may be around product knowledge as much as life experience as well.
That's right, very much so. Okay, so just some ideas there around kind of empathy and how we can improve it. Now what I'd like to do is move on to the next topic, which is agent home working strategies. And I think we're all very much aware of the kind of benefits of home working. We've got kind of 4 key topics listed on here. Luke, in the previous presentation, talked about managing your seasonal call volumes effectively through either outsourcing or perhaps home working is another form of outsourcing in that respect. It gives us greater flexibility. We know that call volumes can be quite seasonal. The energy sector, for example, experience high volumes in the winter, the travel sector typically in the January, February months. And home working can give you that flexibility around resourcing and managing your peak call volumes. It also, and this for me is one of the real benefits, it increases the pool of resource that is available for you to recruit. That can also include a different type of recruit, such as a freelancer or a flexi-time worker, perhaps a mother who's looking to return to work but needs something around school hours, or perhaps even the disabled. A great opportunity to get those type of people back into the workplace. Business continuity, disaster recovery options, as we all know, if the centre goes down or if it's prone to fire or flood, home working is a great option to route those calls from the cloud into agent home workers. And of course, without the capital expenditure of a bricks and mortar contact centre, there's a great way to reduce your operating costs. However, of course, it comes with potential pitfalls. I know a lot of clients are particularly concerned about data security and confidentiality of customer data and how you manage that effectively if that data is being pushed out to home environments. Also from an operational perspective, the management and monitoring of a remote team, including, for example, the training and coaching of those agents. I know we've got the technology through cloud-based telephony to be able to look at call stats and perhaps even dial in and listen to some remote calls. But of course, your workforce can feel slightly isolated and detached from the contact centre when they're working in a home environment, and that's something that we need to consider. And also the other thing, of course, is that not everyone's home environment might be conducive to home working. We can't just as a blanket say that everybody suddenly moves to a home working model. It's not ideal if if you've got young children around the house or pets. Home working is not hot desking between the dining table and the kitchen table, for example.
And we had a comment very similar to this on the chat room, which is on callcenterhelper.com/chat. Seamus says, homework is interesting, culture becomes harder to manage, as does regular coaching and training. So I guess that's one of the other features of just trying to bring the same culture and training into home workers.
Very much so, very much so. And in a moment I'm going to touch on a few sort of tips and sort of snippets for people to consider around that, but I think a good opportunity maybe, Jonty, to pass back to yourself to run the poll for us on home working.
Yes, we've got a poll that comes up which we just want to see where you are on your home working journey. And so if you can tick the box that best describes the statement that fits into your contact centre. So the answers on home working, it's not suitable, we won't be trialling or implementing it. Home working is currently in our plans but not yet implemented. It's in place and working well. It's in place but failing, and we've never considered it or may do so in the future. So just like to vote on that. We're getting lots of comments in on the recruitment. Sanjeet says customers could lose confidence in you if you approach them for hiring the agents for your organisations. I guess it might be working for an outsourcer. They might think you don't possess the skills to recruit the right people for the right job, which is why you want them to be involved in the process. Jody says, in terms of empathy, recruitment is the key. We used a relaxed assessment centre format to test skills, and this helps us get the right advisors. We plan to invite our residents to these sessions to get them involved. So that's quite ties in with what you were saying there. Excellent. And Luke, this is a different Luke to the one we've got on the call today. Technology, older customers may find better support from a like-age call handler who can relate to their feelings, and may feel a younger person is rather talking down to them. So I guess that all ties in matching age and empathy. Let's have a look at the results. Steve Allington, which one do you think is going to come up top?
I would think that probably I'm expecting either currently in our plans but not yet implemented, or people at the other end of the spectrum saying, they're in an environment or an industry where it's just not suitable for them.
Well, let's have a look. Actually, it's quite a split audience here. 30% have never considered it but might do so in the future. 31% don't think it's suitable for them. 16% currently in plans, and 20%, that's quite a bit higher than I'd have thought, in place and working well. So quite a range there. So I'll pass back to you, Steve Allington, and let's take us through the.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for your feedback on the polls there, and I guess some of it may actually tie in quite neatly with some of the bullet points that I've got on the summary. I think that the key really for me is that if you're going to embark upon a home working strategy, it's important that you've got that mapped out very clearly, and that strategy needs to include not just the cloud-based technology but the people and the processes around it in order to make sure that it's optimized and works well. I think recruitment, rather like on the empathy, we talked about the importance of recruitment. Again, it's very important when we're talking about home workers. The profile of person that's suited to remote home working is very different to the type of person who would typically maybe sit in a traditional call centre. So you need to also think about taking into account their work environment or their home environment. Is it suitable for home working? Obviously, it's important that we make some investment in online training tools and also using other common technical tools such as communicators, Skype and video conferencing, helps your agents feel part of the team, less remote, less detached. I think it's also important, to organise face-to-face team meetings. I think having these people working remotely in home environments is ideal for a number of things, but I think it's important also, maybe on a monthly or at least a quarterly basis as a minimum, to get them all together as a team, to give them that feeling of camaraderie, but also giving you the opportunity to deliver some face-to-face coaching and meetings, etc. I think it's important that we monitor social media. I think we can monitor agent performance through the cloud around telephony stats and things like that. But I think it's also important that we're monitoring what they're doing when they're in a home environment. They're not just kind of watching Jeremy Kyle with one eye and Facebook with the other whilst they're taking calls. So without Big Brother watching you, I think people's behaviour in the home is clearly going to be very different to their behaviour in the contact centre. And also the branding of the agent's surroundings, I think, is quite important. I think to help them feel part of the team and for them to designate an area in the home that is truly a workplace or a workspace is quite important. I think we can help them around that by putting up some branding, company branding, customer branding, just to help them feel part of that team, which you would traditionally get if you were sat in the call centre.
And we've got some comments in, thank you very much Steve Allington for that, on the chat room. Simon says we believe there's too much risk behind home working in their organisation. Lack of ability to model staff behaviours is risky. Well, I guess possibly 20% of the audience have been able to overcome those. So perhaps if you'd like to put into the chat room how you've been able to do that, we could have a debate through the chat room. Charlie said home working is okay, it depends on what your users use. Do they have good enough broadband connection, especially if using a soft phone PC? And also, this is where specs come into play. Do they have to use a VPN to connect to the office? Does that add extra levels of resources, as well? So some great feedback there. So thank you, Steve Allington, for that. We're now just going to go across, and we've got another poll for you. The next area we're going to be looking at is PCI compliance. So just going to put a poll up. Be interested to see what your business is doing on PCI compliance. So the answers are: we've nailed it, we know what to do, we're in panic stations, or lastly, what is PCI compliance? So if you'd just like to vote on the answers there. Some quite interesting answers coming through. And just a reminder, if you want to leave a comment, callcenterhelper.com/chat for the chat room. If you've got a tip to add, because the tip section is coming up soon, just type tip in front of your comment. So let's have a look at the PCI compliance, and then I'll hand across to Stephen Wright. So, whoa, 45% of the audience. What is PCI compliance? In which case, we've got the right solution for you for that in a minute. Only 2% are at panic stations. Only 20% of our audience have actually nailed PCI compliance. Stephen Wright, that sounds low to me.
I think it's one of these things which has been around for a while, so a few people have been doing things, but it's taking time to work out what the right solution is, because there are so many different approaches, and technology is only a small part of that. So those results don't entirely surprise me.
Okay, wonderful. I'm now going to hand across to Stephen Wright from Azzurri, who's going to take us through the last of the challenges. Stephen, across to you. And
Right. Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Wright, and I work for the Azzurri Contact Centre practice, and I'm going to be covering three things: PCI compliance, how to make self-service work, and measuring customer experience. So I'll start off with PCI compliance. I saw that 45% didn't know what PCI compliance was or weren't involved. So if you take credit card payments, it's one of those things you can't really hide from, and it doesn't matter what size you are. There's been a bit of a myth that it's something for large contact centres. In fact, if you're asking a customer to take a payment from your organisation, then basically you're asking them to trust that you've put in place a secure way of doing that. So any organisation is responsible in that mode. And there are penalties. Some of these penalties are prescribed. Others are that the credit card companies or debit card companies will stop you taking payments, which is a big enough penalty in itself. And the PCI, the Security Standards Council of PCI have made it very clear there's no single solution. So although I'm going to cover a number of approaches which you can take today, I'm in no way pretending that it's a total solution. To be PCI compliant, it's about processes, it's about people, it's about the network, it's about the data security. So it's a number of things, and no one technology resolves everything. But the thing to remember is it's fundamentally best practice. So although there's been a lot of pressure and fear of putting PCI compliance in, fundamentally it's about protecting secure data. And if you've got secure data, you should really be putting best practice into place. So I'll just go through the way that we're seeing organizations look at it at the moment. Probably the most current, common approach that we see is organizations putting start-stop recording. Basically, when the payment details are being asked for by the customer, the recording stops. So the advantage of this for an organization is you can keep the current customer engagement. You don't need to change what the agent does. But the disadvantage is the whole environment is in scopes. So the agent still gets to hear all the information, and you've got to make sure that there's no way that they can copy that information. So organizations that adopt this approach still have to make sure that agents, for instance, don't have pens on the desk and paper on the desk, because in that way they can copy the information they're hearing. You also have to bear in mind, although it's not been raised much, is that the legal requirements to treat customers fairly trump PCI. There's an awful lot of focus on PCI DSS, but if there's a large gap in your recording when you could be mis-selling, then you've got to make sure that perhaps right at the end of the call you should script it that when the payment is made, the agent says, and so the payment's now been made, so it's very clear that the gap beforehand was around the payment being made. The other approach which we are seeing increasingly is trying to effectively outsource the payment out of the contact center, either internally to, let's say, an IVR payment system, or to use an external agency to take the payment. The key thing here to remember is you are still responsible. As I said earlier, you will be responsible for the asking a customer to make payment. So it doesn't matter how you do it, the responsibility is still yours. But it will reduce the scope. So if the payment details aren't passed through the contact center doesn't necessarily have to be seen as in full scope. But it can impact customer experience depending on how it's set up. So often, if the call is transferred to a payment, you lose the contact with the agent, and you can't then re-put the customer back in contact with the agent. So you've got to think of how it impacts the customer experience. You also have to remember that payment details passed across the network will bring the network into scope. So if you're tromboning out to an outsourced payment, you need to realize that the credit card details are still crossing your network, and you've got to make sure that the network meets PCI compliance. Where we have seen it work is we're working with some debt collection agencies where effectively they're sending out an SMS on a smartphone and then linking the smartphone directly to the outsourced payment. So effectively it's going nowhere near the network. And it's also bringing in a multi-channel view where the SMS and the web link are linked together. But you have to bear in mind applications need to meet the PA DSS rules. So it's it does work, but you have to be responsible for any web pages which are involved if you're redirecting it. So that covers the PCI. Oh, sorry, the last one. Sorry, I completely what is organizations are also looking to isolate the agent using DTMF suppression. So the payments mechanism is in line with the agent. They hear the whole call, but you suppress the DTMF signals once it's got past the payment mechanism. You can have cloud-based or CapEx-based solutions, and the real advantage of this is you can record the whole call because the agents don't get any of the information, none of the information is recorded at that stage. So at this point I'll pass across to Jonty for a poll.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we're running a little slow on time, so we'll skip the poll and move on.
Okay, fine. Okay, so making self-service work. I'll try and run through this quickly. The key here is that I guess there's no one on the call, no matter how much you've been involved in contact centers, who don't have some negative experience of self-service, especially when it's based on the voice-based lines. And one of the problems, of course, is that now increasingly as new channels are emerging, voice calls are often the call of last resort, and the one thing you don't want at that point is to have the whole thing slowed down. So the first thing to say about self-service is it's not all about saving money. Of course, self-service tends to be a tenth of the cost of an agent, so it is a key driver, and all the research has shown that that's been the key driver. But in fact, the research is also showing that the more you make that the driver, you tend to lead to bad design and angry customers who spent 10 minutes in an IVR system coming back to a customer which then needs to be transferred or handled anyway by phone. So things are changing. People are recognizing the importance of self-service in terms of the customer, but there's also a growing customer base used to doing self-service using other channels, whether it's the web or smartphones, able to link in to different routes. You've got customers and a younger generation especially who just assume self-service is the way forward. But the research also shows that monitoring the customer experience is quite poor. So in fact, completion of IVR transactions, which I suppose is the equivalent of first call resolution, is often not measured, or it's not measured how many agents are taking calls from the IVR. So how do you make self-service work? First is understand why people contact your business. Voice analytics companies will often say that companies are always surprised why people are actually calling their companies. So identify the opportunities based on why people are calling, because that's where you can actually save calls. Be specific about why it's good for the customer. If it's no good for the customer will get out and end up talking to an agent anyway, or will just not come back to you. And again, research shows that people are leaving, so younger people give fewer opportunities for a company to do good service. Design, exclamation mark. This isn't something which you can easily do in terms of self-define if you don't have the experience. Do look for organizations who have experience of designing complex self-service organization processes that work, because it's very easy to get it wrong.
I think sort of the web is really one of the key areas where self-service is really starting to take off, and I guess mobile applications is probably quite key. Steve, are you going to be talking to us about measuring customer experience?
Yes.
Could we perhaps
move on to that? Okay.
On that one?
Right. Okay. Measuring customer experience. I'd like to put this into the scope of the customer experience. Most organizations will set up a call center and they will measure the outcomes of the contact center. So they've got a view of what they want to achieve. So they will look at things like net promoter score or customer satisfaction, which are absolutely key because that's what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. But the reality is that when those change, the next question is why. And it's only by understanding the whole customer experience that you can really begin to measure that properly. And I see that as being divided between two things. One is what the customer brings to the table, which is the overall expectation, which is driven by your brand, what people expect from you, what the competition is driving, but also what other segments. Most customers are experts in contact centers because they speak to lots of them, so they know what best practice in contact centers are, and they bring that to the table. The other thing is the organizational offer and behavior. So you've got to make sure that you're linking the customer satisfaction to the behavior rather than the offer. Customer satisfaction might go down because the product's going through a rough time. Nothing to do with what's happening in the contact center. What you're managing is the contact center and the behavior of that. And I say behavior because that's what it looks like from a customer's point of view. Customer will say they just never answer the call. They don't know what they're talking about. They're surly, or I just have to go through hoops to get what I want. And that's all about resources, skills, knowledge, attitude, and processes. From a customer's point of view, it's behavior, and that's what you've got to measure and see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, I was dealing with a gas company who recently found that their net promoter score went down by about 10 points every time the price rise went up. And nothing to do with this customer experience. It's just the way the customers feel when prices rise.
Yeah. So what should you be looking at? Well, first of all, define what experience you want to provide. Track what the customers expect and track the competition. It'll be constantly moving. What was good service and experience last year will not be good service next year. So do track the customers and track the competition. Are you actually doing what you planned or wanted to do? Because it's about doing intentional, consistent, and measured interactions. So do track what's actually going on, which means measuring activity, not just outcomes. Most performance management focuses on outcomes and hopes that the activity works. So if you want to actually manage what you're doing, it's managing activity because that's what you control. So link back to feedback to specific interactions. You want to be able to say customer satisfaction worked well at this time of day, or it worked well if the average handling time goes up or down. You can only do that if the questioning of the customer satisfaction can be linked back to specific interactions. And so you can correlate activity with outcomes. And finally, when you're doing quality management processes, do it specifically around customer experience. Most quality management focuses on agent behavior with an assumption of what the right behavior is. You should step back and use quality management and listen to calls and ensure that the customer experience is working rather than just the agent performing the way you expect them to perform. And I'll pass you back to Jonty.
Thank you very much for that. It'd be very interesting in the audience to know how you measure customer experience. Do you use Net Promoter Score? Do you use customer effort? Or do you have some other measurement? I think on measuring customer experience, the saddest thing I find is that is still this concentration in many contact centres on average handling times. It's by far the single biggest metric, and yet it really has very little impact on what the outcome of the...
And it has huge impact also, I think, on agents, because I think you'll have agents who get poor average handling time because they're giving customers the time of day. And I did see an interesting interpretation where staff morale was seen as dropping as a sign average handling time was going down because they just weren't willing to give the customers the attention. So, you know, average handling time can mean lots of things depending on what's happening in the contact center. It doesn't necessarily mean that customer service is being met in any way.
Indeed. Stephen Wright, thank you very much for that excellent presentation to all of our speakers. It's your turn now in the audience to put in your top tips. You've been a very chatty audience. We haven't had a huge number of tips in, so I think the chance of winning this bottle of champagne is much better than National Lottery, even the scratch card. In fact, I think it's probably even better than better odds than picking the winner on the Grand National this year. So let's go straight into some of the tips. Rudy has said, here's a tip to overcome agent culture, which I think we talked about at the very beginning. Initiate a course of diversity. Not many corporates do that, so that's certainly a key one in agent culture. Audience tip, this is sent in by Simon. We find a lot of companies panic at the idea of automated services and tend to move away from these. Simon, is that that's sent in by Simon? Stephen Wright, is that something that you've found?
Yes, and I think it's interesting that it goes back to trying to help organisations, trying to help customers at the early stages. We work with one solutions provider who actually has live assists to early voice recognition of voice processing systems, so that when the system says actually this isn't going well, it's not recognising what's been said, the live agent behind the scenes helps.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those dangers if you're pushing people on the voice channel onto automated, that they phone up to speak to someone. So there's a bit of a disconnect, whereas things like mobile apps and web are all quite good from a self-service perspective. In response to the comments, Steve Allington, I think that you need to look at the customer profile depending on what you're supporting. Age matches are suitable, so I think we're getting quite a strong picture back on
bit of support.
Yeah, bit of support on that. I think it's just how to do that without breaking the age discrimination law. Luke, this is a different look for Luke Talbot, who's on the call today. Self-service web is very good for generic actions and non-customer specific queries. Mobile apps, for example, can be more customer specific, changes to account details and chasing up orders. So our other Luke, Luke Talbot, that's probably quite good. Mobile apps there for...
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is a rising trend in mobile apps for handling things like bank account queries and other things. I'd say that the web has traditionally been, or can be, quite good at performing all of those activities. A lot of mobile applications are simply web pages housed inside an application. So, yeah, but the general trend is certainly for mobile applications. No one else has your iPad in their hands.
So on our web chat, callcenterhelper.com/chat, Will One sent in a tip. We've developed a license to support process. I guess that's a bit like James Bond, License to Kill. A license to support process for new recruits developed in conjunction with the client to build that trust in the recruitment process. I guess that's also bringing the client into into the support process there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Lucas also said on self-service channels, mobiles are very good for action to be taken by the customer. Sarah M. Gosh, this is a long one. Let's read this through. Utilize all customer insight available from your channels to get a true view of what your customers are telling you. We've done this successfully by forming a number of customer insight data into a forum called Actionable Analytics, which ensures insight is captured from a bottom upwards approach and allows a fortnightly group to meet and take actions against this insight. So I guess this is looking at why people are calling. It allows us to listen to our customers, our people, and the changes that we have seen and have benefited the overall business with increases in Net Promoter Score, reduced contacts. So much so that we've got to the finals of the Professional Planning Forum this year, which I'm up to in I think 2 weeks' time. So congratulations on that, Sarah. Hope you do well in that. So yeah, sort of customer insight. Quite an interesting tip there. So quite a lot of thoughts gone into that one. Sandeep said, I think offering customers the opinion to leave remarks about their experience on the call right after the call, because if you contact them sometime, they may not remember what the survey is about. So I guess that's post-call IVR survey.
Yeah, I think it comes back to this idea of linking to specific interactions, because then you can start understanding what's really happening.
So Luke said, Ofcom have recently identified that customers should not be charged additionally on mobiles for 0800. So the cost for calling 0800 will now be charged to the business and not the customer. I guess that's quite interesting. We tweeted that yesterday. There's a report on The Guardian that goes into that. So how long that will take to come in? I think it's, Luke, is it 2015 that
yeah, I think so, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So Julia said residents contact us to report repairs, high periods of demand, bad weather, etc. Our percentage of how helpful was the advisor drops. So Steve Allington, that's I guess a tricky one, because your customer feedback depends on the weather.
Well, I think what Jodie's actually telling us here is that we've got a situation, almost it links in really with Luke and his peak seasonal call volumes, where agents are feeling under pressure because there's more calls coming in that they've got to be answered, so they can spend less time with customers on the call. As a result, it creates a negative impact on the customer experience.
So Sandra on the web chat said a question answer section on the website means we're publishing customers' questions and our answers so others can self-help. Hallelujah. I think that's a great idea. The number of contact centres I go in where frequently asked questions never get back to the website is just huge. I particularly like that one. It's a
yeah, no, I think we're looking at knowledge management, and it's the same thing. It's trying to make information which is relevant more easily available.
Yeah. Fabulous. Let's take a couple of audience questions. Can interest and experience conflict with each other in recruitment? Sent in by Simon. So Steve Allington, you seem to be passing all the recruitment ones to you.
Yeah, recruitment advisor for the day. I think it's an interesting question, Simon. I think could the interest and experience conflict with each other? I'm not sure is the absolute honest answer. I think the experience really kind of plays a key part for me in engaging with the customer and being able to engage and empathise with the customer. I'm not sure whether interest necessarily conflicts with that, but it's an interesting
well, I've always
question.
followed this thing that you can train for product knowledge, which is, I guess is experience.
Exactly.
You can't train for attitude. So
Completely
I guess it's slightly on different axes, that comment there. And Rudy said remote work has proved to be very expensive converting systems into resilient systems. So how do we overcome this high expense. Who'd like to have a first tackle on the expense of remote working?
Wow. Okay, everyone's looking at me. Well, remote workers can be seen by some as a way of reducing the cost of the contact center. You have to heat their seat, keep a seat there, keep a chair, a computer, etc. But you do need to give them some facilities at home, and that often means putting a dedicated line in for their broadband, making sure they've got some dedicated service into the contact center. And there's also quite a lot of hardware to put into your comms room or into your hosted data center to actually support that. So there can be. I mean, it's very easy to make a contact center resilient. It's not so easy to make a whole group of home workers resilient, because various things can happen. I guess you're not keeping all your eggs in one basket, so something that might affect one home worker in Reading might not affect all your other home workers who are spread across the country. So there's some mitigation there. But it's a tricky question, I guess. It's expensive for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all depends on where you're going from and where you're going to.
Absolutely.
If you really move to a cloud-based system, it costs very little incrementally extra. We
had a contact center a number of years ago who had no contact center, so to speak. It was all home workers, and that was incredibly cheap for them, and they did make it quite resilient. They put dedicated lines in so that there was no contention with home broadband or home telephony or anything like that. Every user had their own home office with their own computer and desk and everything. So, but that was a lot cheaper for them certainly than putting in place something. But they were starting from nothing. So.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got to turn for in questions and answers.